and welcome back. Thank you for joining Enhanced Wellness Living's Women's Hormone Health Summit. I'm Chelsea, your functional medicine health coach, and this morning, Kelly will be joining us and sharing preconception and fertility foundation. So Kelly Engelmann is the founder of Enhanced Wellness Living and our lead nurse practitioner, and take it away.
Good morning, guys. I can't tell you how honored I am to have this conversation with you today. Hopefully, this is just the beginning of a conversation. Whether you are listening to this for yourself and you're ready to embark on this wild journey called motherhood, it is an endurance event, by the way, or you're listening for your daughter or your daughter-in-law, I just welcome you because this conversation really, really is important and needs to be had at earlier and earlier stages in consideration of becoming pregnant. You know, why is this so important to me? When I look back on my legacy, I'm a mom and I'm a grandma, thank goodness. And then as I started my career, I actually started high school working in an OBGYN practice. And I just fell in love with women's health from that very beginning. I then went on to school to become a surgical tech, and I worked in labor and delivery as a tech. And then as I finished my nursing degree, I stayed there and worked as a nurse while I got my master's degree. And I worked in a very conventional environment. Everything was very well controlled. We had the best monitors, we had the best nurses, but everything was on schedule. We used a lot of Pitocin to induce labor. We had a lot of scheduled C-sections at 7:30 in the morning and noontime to fit the doctor's schedule. And we had a lot of unplanned 5:30 C-sections when it was time for the doctor to go home. I didn't think much about it. Those babies were whisked away to the nursery, away from their mom, and that's just the way things were. Once I finished graduate school, I joined a practice, an OBGYN practice that functioned very differently. And I stepped back and I looked and thought, what are they doing? These doctors there were 5 doctors and they did rotate call, but oftentimes they would go in on their night off to deliver a baby because they had a special relationship with that family. Our families were very, very important to us. We spent a lot of time with our patients, educating them. And I asked my doctor, like, what is this about? And he was like, what are you talking about? I had just been in that very conventional mindset. I had never seen anything like that before. I was there 8 years, and my last year in practice, and we took care of high-risk pregnancies. We did a lot of fertility medicine. We worked closely with reproductive endocrinology, so we had a lot of twins, and occasionally we would have some triplets. So it was a very high-risk group that we were working with. And my very last year there, the neonatologist director came to my practice and asked our doctor, like, where are you sending all of your high-risk pregnancies? Because we haven't had a NICU admit in over a year. So we didn't even know, like, the impact that we were making. We weren't keeping count of who didn't wind up in the NICU, but very proud of, like, the simple things that we implemented. Things like making sure our women knew the importance of hydration, making sure that we were screening for UTIs and they understood the first signs of UTI to come in and be evaluated and treated. Basic nutrition beyond prenatal vitamins, right? We were talking about that at very early stages of pregnancy. So I'm very, very proud of that legacy that I left there. But when I look around today and I think, what's changed? We have all of this research coming at us every single day that says preconception care matters, but we're not doing preconception care in the conventional space. And so I felt like it was a good idea to really put together something. And we're doing this Women's Health Summit. Last week, we really focused on the menstrual cycle, and we'll go back to that and we'll talk about the menstrual cycle, just so that you're educated well in that arena. But we'll also dig into some very basic life-giving things that you can be doing on a daily basis that will tremendously impact your health, but also the health of your future children. So I'm so glad that you're listening. This will be recorded. So if you want to share this with someone in your family that's considering pregnancy or your friends, please feel free to do so. As we go through the stages of life, you know, unfortunately, we peak at age 35. And so for those of you that are entering into the pregnancy world at the age or beyond the age of 35, you're going to hear this nasty little term called advanced maternal age. And so it's true, though. We peak out, hormonally speaking, at around 35, and then our hormones start to decline as our ovarian reserve starts to decline. And so we do want to be mindful of that. And that's one of the truths that needs to be said, because today in our society, people are delaying pregnancy. They think they have all this time in the world and they're not ready to be pregnant until they are, and they want to be pregnant yesterday. And they haven't really thought about, like, what do I need to be doing to preserve egg quality? And what do I need to be doing to really plan out when I want to have my family? So we oftentimes think about hormones controlling our energy and our mood, how we sleep, how our metabolism functions, where we carry our weight, obviously our reproductive health, and then also as we age, whether we age gracefully or we start wearing and tearing after the age of 30 or 40. So we have unique lifestyle shifting that happen based on age alone. But in today's world, we'll talk about in a little bit how the disruption that we're getting from the chemicals that we're exposed to, the water quality, the food quality, how they can create even further hormonal dysregulation that we really need to be aware of. So you're going to hear some terms, and I just want to review these. We talked about these last week in the presentation, but there are 4 phases of life. I think this is very poorly done when we think about the phases of a female's life, but you're going to hear these terms. And so I want you aware of them when you hear them, what they mean and what they're referencing. So we call premenopausal anybody before menopause. So it's a big, broad group. So from the time you start having menstrual cycles until you stop having menstrual cycles, you're lumped into that premenopausal group. That overlaps with the perimenopausal group. You're still having menstrual cycles, and in fact, you're still able to conceive. Most of our unplanned pregnancies in the US are actually in this perimenopausal time frame. That's right, unplanned pregnancies. We usually think about teenage years having unplanned pregnancies, but actually it's our perimenopausal female that has made the assumption that they may not need birth control anymore, and they wind up finding themselves pregnant. And so if you're in that age group and you're not planning on pregnancy, then I would highly suggest you get in tune with like what your options are there. It's a little trickier for natural family planning during that time phase because you may not be ovulating predictably or having cycles predictably, but it still can happen. And then our menopausal phase. Menopause is technically just one day, and that's when you have reached the milestone of not having a menstrual cycle for 12 months consecutively. And then the very next day, you're postmenopausal, and that creates your lifespan. So I just wanted you aware of those terms as we talk about hormone balance today. So why does preconception health matter? I think there are many, many reasons why preconception health matters. It really matters for your overall health and conditioning. I mentioned earlier that being a mom is an endurance sport, and I feel like we should be training for that endurance sport and not just waiting for the time when we're ready to be pregnant to be thinking about it. We really need to be thinking about it beforehand. I say a year. If we could get someone a year before they want to be pregnant and really walk them through some basic lifestyle changes, it may not take a year, but if you have some health conditions pre-pregnancy, say your blood sugar is dysregulated, you have a little bit of high blood pressure, you have autoimmune conditions, then really a year is what it's going to take to get things balanced in a way that we can be confident moving into pregnancy that we have reduced your risk for complications. Now, if you're already living a very healthy lifestyle and things are rocking along good, it's really those last 3 months where the egg is being recruited for ovulation that have the most impact. So when you're listening to this and I say a year, like, oh my God, I don't have a year. If you're already doing some things really well, maybe it just needs to be a 3-month period that we really, really focus on producing really good egg quality. So your health matters, right? Your health matters going into the pregnancy. Your mindset matters going into that pregnancy, and your physical health matters too. I mentioned that egg recruitment. That's a process. We are born with all of the eggs we're ever going to have at birth, right? We lose some eggs along the way, even before we start ovulating. And then each time we ovulate, we don't usually just lose just one egg. There are multiple eggs that will mature that don't actually come to fruition. And so as we ovulate each month, our egg count goes down. And typically we're ovulating the most viable eggs first. So as we age, the eggs in our basket tend to be less healthy. So it's just something to keep in mind as we move throughout our life phases. So things like hormones, nutrition stores, your detox pathways, and I mentioned lifestyle habits. These all set the foundation of what's to come in the way of pregnancy and pregnancy outcome. We know that preconception care does reduce complications for both mom and baby. And unfortunately, in today's world, what I'm being told that women are being told is when they ask their doctor about becoming pregnant, they're told, get off your birth control for a couple of months before you start trying, take some prenatal vitamins, and come back and see me once you are about 6 to 8 weeks pregnant. And I feel like there's a huge gap there in things that we could be teaching moms to do in order to get their bodies really ready. We'll talk about the menstrual cycle because it is a vital sign, right? It is a sign that things are working well. There are some natural variations in cycles that we don't want to be too worried about, but we should be having a predictably timed cycle each month. So we think about the menstrual cycle, we'll look at the different phases of that cycle. So I want you familiar with these terms. These terms do overlap quite a bit. But most women, or some women, are not even aware that their menstrual cycle, the day you start bleeding, is the first day of that menstrual cycle. And that's when your endometrial lining is shedding. So you're shedding out what has built up the prior month. And so day one is the first part of that cycle. Your follicular phase actually does start on day one and goes through about day 14 of that cycle. And that's when your hormones trigger the development of your ovaries to produce the egg. And so that follicle recruitment is happening during that time. Then ovulation happens around day 14, where we release that egg. And then the luteal phase determines whether or not that egg is fertilized or not. So whether or not you go into that next menstrual cycle or whether or not you become pregnant. So we do have a window of opportunity with ovulation. Ovulation is 1 day, but that egg does stay viable for 3 to 5 days. And then sperm stays viable for about 5 days. So that's something to know whether you're trying to get pregnant or whether you're trying not to get pregnant, really getting in tune with that time of the month. We have lots of clever ways today to understand our ovulatory cycles. We have wearables that you can wear that measure body temperature and heart rate changes that happen around ovulation. Things like the Oura Ring can give you a good idea. And then there are some at-home tests that you can do that we'll talk about later in the way of measuring hormones at the comfort of your own home to kind of determine, like, when am I ovulating? So if that's something you're interested in, I am an advocate of those things. However, we don't want to medicalize this whole process of becoming pregnant. We want to have fun with it. And if it stresses you out to see that, because this pregnancy journey for some can be a very emotional journey, especially if you're super intentional on wanting to be pregnant within a specific time frame. So one of the things that I'll say about your cycle and your lifestyle, there's this concept called cycle syncing, where we eat in a certain way, we move our bodies in a certain way to sync our lifestyle according to our cycle. And what I will say about that is I think it works really, really well. I think it helps control symptoms for people that are really struggling with their menstrual cycles. And the other thing I'll say about that is if we're not really aware of what our cycle is doing, the lifestyle things that we're choosing to do, the way we're choosing to eat, the way we're sleeping, keeping ourselves hydrated, those things are going to impact your menstrual cycle. It's going to impact that 28 days. It's going to impact how you feel and how you function. So I want to create some awareness around cycle thinking because I think it can be really empowering and help you really think about how is my body functioning during this time and what can I do to help myself feel better. So in cycle syncing during the menstrual phase, this is the first day of your menstrual cycle when you start having a menstrual flow. This phase usually lasts 3 to 7 days for most women. You can often feel like you're having low energy, fatigue, crampiness, sometimes changes in your mood, bloating, even your stools may change. Loose stools, tenderness in the breast, acne. That sounds like loads of fun, right? Not every woman experiences these things. Some women just have their menstrual flow and they don't experience these things at all. And that's typically because they have very little inflammation in the body that the body's dealing with. So ways to control for inflammation, if you'll look at the bottom of the slide, these are things that we know drive the inflammatory process. Salt can make you feel more bloated during this time. Spicy food, caffeine, dairy, processed foods, and alcohol. If we can eliminate or avoid those things during this time, and really during most phases of the cycle, we are going to feel better and function better. So when we think about food, we want to think about iron-promoting foods. We want to think about things that are heavy in antioxidants to really promote hormone balance. And then our movement, we want to kind of dial it back a little bit. Yoga, stretching, walking. If you're a runner and you can't imagine not running, maybe just cut back on the intensity during that time. I really love meditating, journaling, things like that to just get yourself centered, especially if you're struggling with the mood aspects of this menstrual time. So give yourself some slack during this period. And then the next phase that kind of obviously starts during the menstrual phase, which is the follicular phase. This is when the pituitary is signaling to the ovaries to development of that follicle, right? So this follicle has been maturing over the last 3 months, and then there's a lot of signaling that happens for that follicle to become dominant and to present itself for ovulation. And so this time of your cycle, you actually may feel energized and want to get a lot of things done. You may have good creative energy. So if you feel more social, be more social. That's okay. For movement, I think doing some weight training, some endurance type things during this time can be really a good way to kind of utilize some of that creative energy. When you think about food, you'll see some of the same foods listed below for avoiding, like caffeine, sugar, dairy, gluten. Those foods, dairy and gluten, I get a lot of questions about those. Those are inflammatory foods by nature. And if we're trying to eat a diet that's, anti-inflammatory, you're going to do yourself wonders by just decreasing those. If you know you're reactive to them, I would say get them completely out, but definitely minimize that. And of course, processed foods, fried foods, and alcohols we want to get out. But think about foods that are high in protein, foods that are rich in green leafy vegetables, and really all vegetables can be on the plate during this time of month. Even some healthy carbs to fuel all of that activity that you're doing. Then we move into the ovulatory stage. Again, this can be a really fun time of lots of energy. So harness that energy, do with it whatever you want to do with it during that time. Yeah, Chelsea, it went back to luteal phase. Can you advance to ovulatory phase? There we go. So again, you're going to see that same list at the bottom for avoiding, but really focus on foods that are supporting the liver. Think about your cruciferous vegetables, your anti-inflammatory foods, foods that are rich in vitamin D and folate. So your green leafy vegetables should be on the plate. Think about, making your to-do list and creative things that you can be doing with your partner during this time. More intense exercise like cardio, yoga, weightlifting, Pilates, all of those things can be embraced during the ovulatory phase. And remember, this is just a day or two. And then moving into the luteal phase, oftentimes we hear from patients like, I don't know what happens to myself during my luteal phase. After ovulation, I become a different person. I'm bloated, I'm swollen, I'm grumpy, I'm irritable. During this phase, Chelsea, can you advance that to the luteal? The luteal phase. I know our slides are lagging a little bit. Yeah, there we go.
I think we've got a little
delay. Yeah, I think there's a little delay.
Yeah.
I apologize, guys.
Friends.
Yeah. Welcome to technology, right? But again, you're going to see that same list of foods at the bottom that we want to avoid. And we really want to focus on all of the self-care things that we teach you to embrace. Get a massage. Sometimes acupuncture during this phase can be a really good strategy to help just keep the body balanced and relaxed. Epsom salt baths, deep breathing, taking some social breaks. We don't always have to be social if we feel like staying in. It's okay to stay in. I really love yoga during this time, stretching. Anything that makes you feel good and feel cared for, I would say embrace during this time. If you're experiencing a lot of symptoms during this luteal phase, this deserves a conversation. Again, some women have really exaggerated symptoms and some don't have symptoms at all. We would love to get you into that phase where you're having less symptoms during this time. And so as you work through making some lifestyle changes, if you're not seeing that phase of your cycle improve, then that's a conversation to be had. There's many, many things that can be done to enhance how you feel during the luteal phase, and the things we have suggested here can be a really good start. So nutrition for fertility in general, right? We mapped out kind of the phases of your cycle, but when we're thinking about just general terms of fertility, we want to make sure that we're getting diversity in the diet. So what does that look like? Foods rich in iron like spinach, lentils, beef liver, bone broth, be having these in the diet, pretty liberally. We know that when we become pregnant, our blood volume increases by at least a third. That's volume of blood. That doesn't mean that we can produce that many red blood cells. So sometimes we'll become functionally anemic during childbearing, during pregnancy, and that can leave us feeling really, really tired and sluggish. So the more that we'll do beforehand and building up our iron stores, the less challenges we'll have with the issue of anemia during pregnancy. We want to make sure we're getting good quality, healthy fats. Fats are really, really important for energy. They're important for our cell membranes, but even more important for the development of the baby's brain. Remember though, the baby's going to get what it needs typically. It's going to suck mama dry. So mama's brain is the one that oftentimes will struggle during pregnancy. We call it placenta brain because we didn't get enough of these omega-3s in the diet ahead of time. So really focusing on those healthy fats, wild-caught salmon, walnuts, those can be consumed pretty liberally. We want to focus on folate, not folic acid. In the United States, we fortify products with folic acid, like grains. Most grains are sprayed with folic acid during production. And so folic acid is synthetic. It takes up space where folate should be active, and your body oftentimes doesn't know how to metabolize it out, and it can create some problems. So we want to get folate-rich foods in the diet. We want to make sure our prenatal vitamins contain folate, not folic acid. So pay attention to that as you're looking for a prenatal vitamin. But foods that are rich in folic acid and folate are beets, asparagus, and dark leafy vegetables. So get those in abundance. We also want to consume foods that support our liver. And we'll talk a little bit more about liver when we talk about detox later. But that would really be our cruciferous vegetables, putting lemon in our water, anything to keep our body alkaline. So I mentioned this concept of detox. I kind of hinted to that, right? When we think about our bodies are designed to detox on a daily basis. That's why we have a liver to help with us with converting things that we get exposed to into water-soluble form so that we can excrete them. However, in our environment today, and I'll show you these in a little bit, we are experiencing more exposure to chemicals that cause endocrine disruption. And so it's more important today than ever that we have some type of detox strategy, some way of thinking about detox and implementing a detox so that we set ourselves up for success. So what I mean when I say detox, it's basically allowing your body to do what it naturally already does and supporting it during the process. So we want to make sure that we're getting clean air. If you don't have adequate air filtration in your home and workspace, I would recommend that. Clean water. I say get a filter or be a filter. You know, bottled water is really not the best option because of the plastics that we're being exposed to. And so really investing in a filter that you can drink filtered water would be ideal. And then clean food. So eating organically as much as possible, especially off of the Environmental Working Group, they put out a clean 15 and a dirty dozen. So really focusing on that dirty dozen, making sure that you're getting those organically. That will go a long way in helping your body offload the other things that you're being exposed to. So we want to detox before pregnancy because we know that these hormone disruptors can not only affect you and your egg quality and ability to be fertile, but they also have an impact on the baby. Back in 2010, there was a study done on cord blood, and they did an evaluation and found that there were over 287 chemicals in cord blood in 2010. Now, we haven't stopped putting chemicals into the environment, so we haven't repeated that study to see like what's there today, but I have to say it would probably be more. In today's world, our chemicals are nanoparticle, small particle size chemicals that are able to get across that placental barrier. We used to believe that the baby was protected and we didn't really have to worry too much about chemicals because that placenta was going to keep it away from the baby. And we know in today's world that's just not true. And so we want to have these detox strategies. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned a year, because I think it does take time to change out our products. It takes time to think about what are we putting on our skin? You know, what are we drinking? What are we eating? It takes time to kind of get that rhythm in life and set up your lifestyle in a way that's just less toxic to begin with. And so I do believe a year, it takes about that time. But again, if you only have 3 months, doing a detox prior to pregnancy, I think is a really good way to get started. We want to make sure that you're hydrating. We say about half of your weight in ounces. If you weigh 120 pounds, that's 60 ounces a day. minimum for water intake. If you're active and sweating, you may need more. And that was just a general guideline. We want to make sure that you're having a bowel movement every day. And that's really, really important because I mentioned that your liver processes these chemicals, but it's up to you having a bowel movement to get them out. So using fiber or having fiber in the diet in your vegetable intake helps bind up those chemicals so that you poop them out. And then getting adequate movement. And so moving your body helps you have normal active bowel movements. I mentioned earlier reducing plastics. We're getting a lot of plastic exposure. A lot of our foods are shrink wrapped in plastic. We have plastic water bottles. So it's not that one plastic is bad, it's that the accumulation of that plastic over time acts like estrogen in the body. And so we'll see pseudoestrogens or xenoestrogens in the body that really shouldn't be there. Perfumes and fragrances, I think about dryer sheets and these beads that we're putting in the dryer. All of the perfumes that those things are putting off are endocrine disruptors and can be really impactful. And then conventional cleaners. So we'll talk a little bit later about some swaps that we can be doing. I mentioned earlier eating your cruciferous vegetables daily. I say 2 cups of cruciferous daily would be ideal. If you're not used to eating that, start slow and gradually go up so that you don't have challenges with bloating and things like that. But these cruciferous vegetables are kind of like scrubbers. They go in and they scrub the side wall of the colon and help you excrete things. They have lots of fiber. They actually have compounds in there that help you balance out your estrogen. So for those of you that are estrogen dominant, those can be a really good way to help balance out estrogens. And then other ways to support your liver. Using teas like dandelion tea, using bitters, even castor oil packs can be really supportive to the liver. Dry brushing and using sauna can be a really good way to augment detoxification. It helps you release toxins through the skin. So our liver is a detox organ, our skin is a detox organ. So doing things like dry brushing and sauna can be a really good way of getting our skin to release some toxins. And then getting lymphatic flow. So simple things like walking and stretching, deep breathing, and then rebounding can be really good at getting lymphatic flow to help with detox pathways as well. So detox doesn't have to be scary. In our practice, we do a 21-day, we call it a metabolic reset, but it's a really good way of supporting your body through that detox process. On some of the earlier slides, we mentioned removing gluten and sugar and caffeine. That can sound all scary. But when we put that together with a metabolic reset and we support you, I'm always surprised at patients that were like, it wasn't that bad. Like I didn't miss caffeine because I had all the nutrients I needed. My energy was actually really, really good. So if you need help with that, please reach out. So we think about cycle syncing with foods. These are just some really good things that you can print off and have on your fridge as a reminder of what phase of your cycle that you're in and how you could be eating to support that phase of your cycle. We have another one that's a little bit different format that I'll show you now that shows you another way of looking at this. So ever how it helps you see those different cycle phases and helps you embrace what food has the potential to do. I would encourage that. I think there's power in learning food first approach and what food alone has the ability to do. Chelsea, can you show us that next cycle syncing document? When we think about eating whole foods in this phase of working on fertility, there are many reasons why that's important. There was a study that came out just a few weeks ago that we'll put into the chat for reference, but it was showing that women that ate a Western diet, a highly processed diet during their babies, had an increased risk for liver damage that went beyond, like even didn't correct itself after birth. It didn't repair. And so, that's a real big issue for babies born today. And so even more reason why just learning to eat real whole food even before you get pregnant. So you're not having to learn so many new things once you do become pregnant, I think can be profoundly impactful. Other studies out on the gut microbiome. So we used to think that babies were born with a sterile gut. And what we know today is the health of the mother's microbiome, which is a direct reflection of what she's been eating, the things that she's been exposed to, whether she's had antibiotics and steroids and chronic stress, dictate kind of how her microbiome is. And her microbiome is affecting the baby's microbiome. And the microbiome sets the stage for immune function for that baby. So we have all of these studies really to support that eating a whole food-based diet before pregnancy and during pregnancy has a profound effect on the baby. And then there's this concept of seed cycling. And I really, really do love this because it is so easy. And it's very, very profound in helping us balance out estrogen, primarily estrogen dominance, and a way to get in our fat, our healthy fats and our fiber. And so basically the way this is laid out is in your follicular phase, days 1 through 14, you increase your consumption of flaxseed or pumpkin seed, or a combination of those two, for that 14 days. And then starting with the luteal phase, we increase consumption of sunflower or sesame, or a combination of those. I mean, that's super simple to throw that into a smoothie, to throw that on top of a salad. Those are fun to eat and easy to get in without a whole lot of effort. And so that would be a really good way of helping the body just naturally balance the ratios of estrogen and progesterone. So we talked about food and how to cycle sync food. Movement is the same way. And I kind of mentioned this earlier when we were talking about each phase, but this is also a really good graphic that you could put on your fridge or maybe your mirror in your bathroom to kind of talk about different phases of movement, different phases of your cycle, and how you can incorporate the appropriate movement during this time. Again, especially if you're struggling with energy, struggling with focus, and really want to maximize what your body is able to do. I do believe that our bodies are meant to move. I don't think we should be sedentary during any phase of our cycle necessarily, but we want our movement to be appropriate for what our body is trying to do. I feel like you'll feel better, you'll function better, you'll rebound better with the harnessing what the menstrual cycle is doing in the way of movement. So I mentioned earlier endocrine disruptors. I want to give you a better description of what that is. So basically, in our environment, there are things that look like hormones to the body, and there are things that drive inflammation. So when we think about hormone balance, we think about three different things. We think about hormone production. That's how is your body able to produce these hormones. Communication from the brain to the ovaries dictates how we, produce our estrogen and progesterone. Whether or not we mature an egg or not dictates how we produce some of those hormones. So production is a thing and it is important. Then we think about hormone processing, and that happens in the liver and in the gut. So as we make these hormones, or whether we're exposed to these synthetic hormones in the foods that we're eating, those go through the liver and they're biotransformed in a way that helps our body utilize them better or excrete them. And then we have things in the environment that create inflammation that prevent or improve. So we may have, fish oil, fatty acids that help improve hormone regulation at the cellular level, or we may have things like sugar and endocrine disruptors that block uptake of hormones at the cellular level. We cannot measure that clinically yet, hormone uptake, but we can measure free levels of hormones. We can measure production of hormones. We can measure the metabolites of hormones. There's a lot we can see, but there's a lot we can't see. But what we do know is there are many, many, many endocrine disruptors out there. We have a few of them listed here, and this is only a few of them. What we do know that if we're eating a diet heavy in cruciferous vegetables, lots of fruits and vegetables, lean meats, organic when possible, that we have less endocrine disruptor challenges than if we're eating a conventional diet. So things like sugar, flour, dairy, gluten, alcohol, caffeine, we know for sure those are creating an element of endocrine disruption. And to what degree that causes disruption will be very individualized per person. We also know that chemicals that we're exposed to in our environment, like the air we breathe, the water we drink, those bioaccumulate. So our body's very clever. When we are exposed to these toxins, we should be able to run those through the liver, biotransform, excrete. If we're not excreting, say we're constipated and we're not offloading for that day, our body will take that chemical that we could not excrete and it'll tuck it away in fat tissue. So oftentimes we'll have chemical exposure, chemical toxic burden showing up in our fat tissue. And so we think about that environmental burden that we're carrying around with us every day. That's another reason why doing something like a metabolic reset can help us offload those things before we become pregnant and before it has the ability to affect our next generation. So again, think very simple, think clean air, clean food, clean water first, and then start looking at What am I putting on my skin? How am I helping my body support just natural detoxification? So we think about hormone balancing tips, right? It seems so complicated, and it can be, but it doesn't have to be. We want to start simple. So this is a little graphic that just shows you how to build a hormone balancing meal. We want protein to be there. We want a healthy fat to be there. We definitely want fiber. And if you don't take anything away from today, except our body needs fiber to balance hormones, whether you get that in a fiber supplement or food, I would rather you get it in food, but wherever we start is a good place to start. Just know that when you start a fiber supplement, particularly, or if you change your diet, go slow and gradually increase that fiber. Don't just start off all of a sudden with, a fiber rich day. When your gut microbiome is not really adjusted to that. We do want some starchy veggies. I love carrots, sweet potatoes, and things like that have a lot of pigment in them. They're going to have more nutrient quality to them. And then an occasional dessert, right? Some berries would be a really good after dinner dessert to pick. So I mentioned product swapping, right? And so you are using your products and you're due to replace them. I say really look at what you could be doing to upgrade what you're using. And it's really getting back to the basics. We don't have to be so fancy with all of our cleaning products. Simple things like baking soda and vinegar can go a long way. Things like hydrogen peroxide can go a long way to help us clean. Swapping out our plastic water bottles for stainless steel or glass, swapping out our conventional deodorants. Conventional deodorants do contain chemicals like aluminum that we're putting under our armpit that gets absorbed by our lymphatic system that can affect our stores of those things and can affect our brain health long term. So swapping those out for things that are more mineral based. Swapping out your plastics for glass or stainless steel. Swapping out, now we have all these feminine products that we didn't have back in the day. We only had choices of tampons back in the day, but now we have menstrual cups. We have organic tampons even. And then looking at our cookware. So those are things that you can work toward changing over time, right? We can't change everything at once, but look at what you can change, what's the most impactful, and just start there. So what is the prescription for natural hormone balance? I mentioned working on hormone production is important. We want to make sure that we're keeping our stress levels under control so that there's good communication from our brain to our ovaries to produce these beautiful hormones. We want to work to reduce endocrine disruptors like toxins and chemicals in our environment. We want to eat in the way that supports blood sugar balance. So eating protein with our meals and getting fiber with those meals goes a long way at helping balance out our blood sugar. And we want to deal with any underlying inflammatory condition that may hinder our ability to keep hormones balanced and to become pregnant and have a healthy pregnancy outcome. So if you're not working with someone on those issues, I would encourage you to do so before you become pregnant. And then testing. Let's talk about understanding testing. It can be as simple as a blood test at this phase of your life. If you're really wanting to get pregnant and the question you're trying to solve for is, am I ovulating? Am I producing the hormones that I need to be producing to have ovulation? So blood tests measuring ovulation on day 21 of your cycle can be extremely helpful in that regard to help you see that. But just remember, with blood testing, we're only seeing hormone production. We can't tell what's going on underneath the surface as far as hormone processing, and we can't tell what's going on at the cellular level for hormone uptake. And so if stress is a big component of your story, if you've had a high stress life or currently are under high stress, I highly recommend looking a little deeper, whether we do that through salivary testing or you measure cortisol over the course of the day. We're looking at adrenal hormones. And we're also looking at sex hormones. Those together can tell us a lot. Or we can also do hormone testing where we look at hormone processing. So using a urinary test to look at not just production, like how much are we producing, but how are we processing that hormone? So for our more complex cases, we know there's something underlying there. We want to really dig deep and see what's influencing what in the way of production, in the way of processing, and in the way of nutrients. That Dutch panel also shows us nutrient status that drive key hormone balance. So regardless of what we're looking at today, there are many, many ways that you can assess that. I mentioned at-home testing. There's something called Mira that you can do at home for yourself to look at day to day, month to month, like how are my hormones being released. And if that's helpful to you, I do encourage that. I think that can be a really good tool. I do believe in tracking your cycles. So using an app like Flow or one of the other apps out there that help you see like cycle predictability to help you understand that a little bit better. We are, as part of this hormone summit, we are offering some discounts on testing. We know in today's world, you can go anywhere to do your testing. You can go directly to Dutch and order a Dutch kit. You can go right to LabCorp and do your own labs without a provider at all. But if you're really wanting someone to help you dig into this hormone balance equation for yourself, help you map out some things that can help you during this preconception period, I would encourage you to reach out directly to our number, that's 601-7. What we're offering, we are offering some special discounts on our testing. Again, testing alone, I don't believe that's the answer if you're really wanting to dig in and restructure some things for your lifestyle. But if you're wanting to answer specific questions on your own, feel free to do that. We also have some specials on women's health procedures that we're proud of. We help women in all phases of their life, regardless of what their challenge is with sexual function and hormone balance. So please feel free to reach out. We've enjoyed the questions that have come in to us. Keep in contact. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, of course, our website. We're here to help you fill in the gaps of the things that you're not getting in the conventional space, and just make sure that you're optimizing your health for long term. Because as I mentioned before, this idea of motherhood it's an endurance event, and we want you strong for the long haul.
Thank you, Kelly, and thanks for everyone who joined us. Reach out. That is my direct number, 601-724-7882. Share this information with anyone in your life who will benefit, and we'd love to help you live life well. Take care until next week.